Hello, this is just going to be a quick tutorial on making a Growl style notification. So if you know, Growl is, that's not going to bring up the right stuff. It's these little notifications that pop up on the side. You've probably seen them before. They're controlled by apps or websites or something that you're connected to, and they're very popular. And we're going to make one that shows up inside a website. So this is what we're going to be making. It scrolls with the page, and when you click it, it goes away, just like the regular Growl notifications. So I have here a just a sample Bootstrap template thing. We don't need to worry about the actual content, and a bunch of content so that we can bunch of lorem ipsum so we can scroll down and see how it's going. This is the actual notification. It's just boiler, error text that I just made up. And we're going to be doing the CSS for it, and we're going to be doing the actual click event handler with jQuery. So I have here, I'm just using the CDNs for Bootstrap, and I have a styles CSS file, and I have a script.js file, and I have the CDN for jQuery. So I already made this little button. We did the CSS for it because it's not really the point of the tutorial. So that did the wrong thing. Let me start this back up. So let's open up styles, and we'll start dealing with this little section right here. So the first thing we're going to do is give it that background, that black background. So let me see if I can just remember this correctly. The ID on the div is error notification. I also gave it a little ID of error lead so we can do the font here. I think I already did the fonts and everything. Yep, we have error notification there. Just gave it some basic text styling, and now we're going to do the actual box. So let's grab error notification, and we're going to do some things first off. The last thing we're going to do is give it a display of none, so that now it disappears. It's not going to show up on the screen. That's why I put it at the bottom. If you noticed, I put it at the bottom of the index.html page, similar to a Bootstrap modal. It's normally where you'd put the modal because it doesn't actually appear on the regular flow of the DOM. So we're going to do that, but for now, so I can actually see what I'm doing, I'm just going to comment that out, and then we'll put it back at the end. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give it a width, because if you notice, I'm using brackets here, and what brackets does is it opens a little mini web server so you can see what it would look like, but it also shows you some live preview, and so it knows that I'm selecting this error notification ID, and it's giving me this box. So we can see that the box is a little bit big. It's going all the way across the page. So actually, I'm going to give a little extra room for the page so it's not too small. So we're going to first give it a width of about, let's say, 300 pixels. That looks a lot better. So now we can see it goes straight around, but we have a little bit of it's too small in between the bottom line and the top line, so we'll give it some padding. We'll give it about, let's say, 10 pixels. There we go. That looks a lot better. And we also have these boxed corners, and we don't want that. We want some nice rounded corners, so we're going to give it a border radius of, let's say, 10 pixels. There we go. Now we're looking a lot more like the Growl notification. Only problem is we have no background color. Well, if you look at the Growl notifications, they don't exactly have a solid background color. So if I were to say, you can see over here, they're kind of, see-through a little bit with a black. So if I were to say the background color, I'll just do that is going to be, let's say, my favorite shade of gray, 50-50-50. That doesn't look quite right. Oh, I also forgot to do something. Let's give this a color of bisque. Ew, I don't like that. Let's give it a color of green, like a chartreuse. Let's do that. Close enough. Okay, we'll work with that. Okay, so we have the padding, we have that. So you can see the background color isn't quite see-through. If I were to, well, we can't see it right now, but if this were on top of the text or on top of, you know, the nav bar or something, we wouldn't be able to see through that. So there's a few ways to give transparency to a background color in CSS, but my favorite way actually uses a different form of giving it the color. So this is called hex code, and it's a base 12 system kind of thing. If you know anything about color theory, this first 2-digit is red, this second 2-digit is green, and this third 2-digit is blue. So if I were to say give it 000050, you can see it's half blue kind of thing. So what we're going to do instead is these work on a hex system, which is base 12. It sounds weird, but it's base 12. So if I give it FFFFFF, that's white. But really what that's equating to is 255, 255, 255, because that's what the FF actually means. So what we can do is we can use a different version of background color in CSS, which is just background, and we're going to give it RGBA. So what's that A mean? The A means alpha. So let's give it a 255, 255, 255, and the alpha is going to set the transparency of the background color. So I'm going to give it 0.7, and if I save that, why isn't this working? Should be working. Oh, sorry, not 255. I was still thinking about that example. We're going to give it 50, 50, 50, and that's going to give it a darker color. So that's what we got going on. If I wanted it to be darker, I could lower that number. I'll give it 20, 20, 20, and it's slightly darker. The transparency makes it difficult to see the difference, but it actually is slightly darker. We'll stick with 20, 20, 20. That sounds fine. So now we have it down in this corner, but where we really want it is up here, you know, in the standard where you'd see a Mac notification or something like that. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to take this div and we need to sort of put it out of the flow of the DOM. So the DOM is the document object mapping. I don't know what it stands for, but it's sort of how the elements are being presented on the page and how they're interacting with each other. So what we need to do is we need to tell this that we don't want it to show up in a line. We don't want to show it up in, you know, it's at the bottom of index.html. We don't want it to be there. We want to tell it that it's just there because we want it, but not necessarily in that location. So we're going to tell it that the position is, well, let's start with relative, because that's easier. So relative position, if you can think about it, is, you know, relative not to the elements on the page. I wouldn't be saying it's relative to, you know, this paragraph. Oop, not that. I wouldn't be telling that it's relative to this paragraph. I'd be telling it that it's relative to the border of the page, so the top, right, bottom, and left. And the way we do that is after we declare that the position is relative, we say, okay, so the top is 50 pixels. What's going on there? Top is 50 pixels. Oh, maybe I'm wrong here. Should be right. Top should be 50 pixels, and the right should be 20 pixels. Why isn't that working? Should be position relative. Oh, I'm sorry, not position. That actually, position relative does mean relative to the element on the page. What I actually meant is position absolute. It's a little bit difficult to understand, but absolute means absolute compared to the borders of the window of the global element, which is what we're going to be dealing with in jQuery. Sorry about that. It's confusing because the wording makes it seem like it should be relative to the page, but it's actually absolute. So now that we're up here, you can see that transparency. You can see everything is under there. If you want, you can give it a point, let's say 0.5, and you can see it's slightly more transparent. And if you give it a 1, it's fully opaque. So we're going to leave it at 0.7 because that looks nice. And let's actually give the top a little bit too much. Let's give it 20. Uh-oh. What happened there? Well, what happened was we put it underneath the header by accident. So the way Bootstrap works is I go in, but I don't know exactly where it is in the Bootstrap code. But this header has something called a z-index. And what the z-index is, if you've ever worked with 3D programs, the higher the z-index, the closer to the viewer it is. The lower it is, the more below it is. So you can actually think of it like layers. So let's say that the header is about 200 or so. That'll bring it above everything, but actually it's a lot more than 200, as we're about to see. And if it was negative, it would be below everything no matter what, pretty much, because everything starts out with a z-index of 0. So this header is covering up our notification bar, and we don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell it that the z-index is, well, let's start with, I'm going to give it a high number, 900, and that's not enough. Turns out the z-index we need is 1000. And I'm serious, if you try to do 999, it doesn't work. 1000 is what we need to put it on top of that header bar. So now you can see everything's good. So I'm going to change that position. I said I was just giving that to display, you know, what exactly we're talking about. Absolute is targeting the window of the document, but there's another position that will let us be able to scroll, and this notification bar will come with it. And that's called fixed. So if we put it as fixed, now if we scroll, it stays on the same position of the page, no matter where we are. So that's nice. That's something where, you know, if there was an error of something down the page, they wouldn't need to scroll all the way to the top to see that there was an error. They would just pop up right here. So that's good. So it looks like we're getting close to finishing up the CSS. And if you noticed, I gave a little bit more room up here and a little bit less room over here. And you know what? Because I'm using half a page here, I'm actually going to make it even less. Because what we're going to do is we're going to have it fade in and move slightly to the left, like you would see at the notification of Growl. So that's how they work it. They give it a little animation where it moves in and fades in at the same time. So that's what we're going to do. And we're also going to make it where if we click this, it disappears. Sort of like a dismiss kind of thing. You could also set it up where inside of this div, you could really put anything you want inside of this div, because we're just going to be controlling the whole element instead of the individual elements. So if we go to index, you can see this div here is just a regular div with an ID with the text. So you could add buttons in here if you want. I could do input type of button and give it a class of button and button defaults. And this is just Bootstrap styling that's built in. Give it a value of exit, and you know, you could play around with it and actually decide if you want it over here, you want it down by the bottom right. That's just gravy on it, and you could make that button react and make it disappear if you want. But we're just going to deal with a basic box, and when we click the box, it's going to disappear. So it looks like we're pretty much done with the CSS. So it's time to start working on the actual functionality of the page. So we're just going to give this button button with an ID of notification. When we click it, we'll have it pop up. When you get to your actual, page or app, you probably want it to respond to something different. For example, if they try to submit a form and they didn't do something right, you might have it pop up when that happens. But for now, we're just going to use the test button. And that test button has an ID of notification. And I also, if you noticed, uncommented the display none, so that's why that div is no longer there. It's there, but it's invisible. It has an opacity of, it's been sort of removed from the DOM. So we're going to go in, we're going to use some straight up jQuery. And if you've never used jQuery before, it is a huge library of functionality, and it really gives you this jQuery object that takes a selector, so we can just give it that ID of notification. And jQuery offers a shorthand, which you've probably seen, which is just a $sign. And that's a valid variable in JavaScript, so it's just, a shorthand. If you've ever seen that, there's nothing fancy going on here. It's just, a regular function with a name, and you pass it some parameters. So with jQuery, you have to also give it an event handler. You want to tell it when you want something to happen. So I could tell it, if I had a text box, when I press a key, or if my mouse hovers, you have, dot on enter, on exit, hover. We're just going to do dot click, and we're going to pass it an anonymous function with no name. We're just making it up on the fly. Make sure you remember to add your semicolons, and we're just going to test this out, because you always want to test stuff, because you end up writing a big thing of JavaScript and then something doesn't work and you're not sure why. You want to test things every step of the way. So I'm going to test, not hi, I'm going to test it worked, or I'm going to alert it worked. And alert is just a built-in JavaScript function. We're going to save that, and we click this. It worked. There we go. So now we know that it is correctly selecting the button and it's putting the right event handler on. Okay, so that div has a ID of error notification. So we're going to do the same jQuery object. We're going to pass it the ID of error notification, and we're going to give it the animation we want it to do. So we want it to fade in. Nice little fade in. So we're going to do fade in. That's a jQuery function. And just remember the semicolon, and we'll save that. We click this. There we go. It fades in. But when we click it, nothing else happens. That's all we got going on right now. We're going to also have it do a little move over. Like I said before, we want it to pop in like the Growl notifications, fade in, and also move slightly in. It's a nice little animation going on. So there is also in jQuery you can just chain functions. You don't need to put them on separate lines. So I don't need to go in and select error notification again. All I need to do to give it something else is go dot, and I'm going to give it the animate, and animate takes a parameter this time, and we're going to just bring it down to the second row, and it's going to take a parameter of what you want to animate. So we want it to move to the left, and the way we're going to do that is, if you remember in styles, I said it's a fix and I gave it a right of 10 pixels. So that's 10 pixels from the right side. So we're actually just going to increase that. We're going to tell it to go out. So we're going to tell it to animate the right, and we're going to have it go to 20 pixels, but I can't give it 20 pixels because we're in JavaScript. So I need to give it a string of 20 pixels. And when we click the button, uh-oh, that's not what we want. We don't want it to fade in and then animate, because that's what that really does. We want it to fade in and animate at the same time. So there's actually some a parameter you can pass to any animation that will fix that for us. There's quite a few ways to fix this problem, but we're just going to do the Q, and we're going to set it to false. So what that's going to say is, don't queue this up. Don't fade in and then animate. Just, do everything at the same time. So we're going to save that, and if we press it, there we go. fades in and moves. I can't really get rid of it, so I need to refresh. Fades in, it moves at the same time. We don't have any queuing going on. So that's great. We have our whole notification popping up script done. So now we want to set it up where if we press the div, that it disappears. So I should be able to click on this and it'll dismiss. So this time we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use our jQuery object, and we're going to select, this time, straight up the error notification. And we're going to tell it the same function. When this div is clicked, we're going to pass it a function, another anonymous function, and we want it to do something. This up here, we had two different things that we were selecting, so I needed to do when notification is clicked, do something to error notification. This time we're telling it when we click error notification, we want something to happen with error notification. So we can use some JavaScript keyword. We can use this, and this will refer to error notification. So we're going to tell it we want it to fade out. Same thing, fade in, fade out. So I'm going to save that and make it pop up, and when I click it, fades out. Wonderful. But now when I click it again, our little animate function didn't exactly turn out again. What's going on? Well, what happened is I clicked it. When the page is first loaded, the right is 10 pixels because that's the script that the browser loaded. It says it's 10 pixels. But once I have the notification pop up, oops, wrong script. Once I have the notification pop up, it's at 20 pixels. So when I dismiss it and I bring it back up again, it's already at 20 pixels. There's nothing to animate. So we need to use this again to reset. We're going to reset this box to be back to a right of 10 pixels. So dismiss it, bring it back up. So let's just daisy chain some stuff. We'll tell it, okay, let's just set the CSS this time. We're not going to do an animate. We don't need it to animate. And we're going to tell it, okay, we want the right CSS property to be 10 pixels. Okay, let's try this out. Bring it. Oh, it worked, but there's a bit of a problem there. When you have a fade out and then you change the CSS is quicker. When you're changing a CSS property, it's not actually an animation, it's just setting a property. And because the fade out takes longer to do than changing a CSS property, when we dismiss it, the CSS property changes before the fade out is done. So we want the CSS to reset after the fade out has completed. And there's a way to do that in JavaScript. It's called a callback function. So in this fade out, up here we gave it an thing of queue. Here we're going to give it a function, and jQuery is very smart. It knows that if there's a function inside of this fade out property, that it's going to be a callback function. We're not going to do this function until fade out is done. So we're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to tell it this dot CSS, and we're going to select that right property, and we're going to pass it 10 pixels. So that's going to set the right to 10 pixels. And if I save that, click it, let's bring it back up. There we go. And if I scroll down, everything's still good. We can have it do there. I can't really bring it up while it's over here. And that blue thing that's popping up, that's just brackets highlighting the div that we're selecting. And there we go. Actually, that's pretty much it. We have a nice little animated Growl notification style system popping up that can be reacted to any element on your page. You just need to select it and tell it, when something happens, bring this up. You can also do some fancy stuff with the HTML, passing it, variables of what errors are doing, but that's for another tutorial. This is all I have for you today, and play around with this. Let me know what you do with it, and thanks for watching.